So I've been living in Sweden for about 2.5 years now, and just about once a year, I come back to America and visit my folks and have a little bit of time back where I'm from. And some things just stand out to me more and more now because I've become so adapted to the life in Sweden. I mean, most of the people I hang out with in Sweden now are Swedish. I speak only Swedish at work, on the job, and I truly feel like I'm starting to become part of the culture in Sweden. So now when I come back, especially on this trip, there's some things that instantly stuck out to me, and I'm gonna go over 5 of those things that I really noticed here in this video. So this first one I've talked about in previous videos, but it's something that I really want to mention again because it's the first thing that I noticed when I landed in America, and that is how social Americans are. When I landed in New York, I had just got off a 7.5-hour flight, and I had another 6-hour flight coming up, and I just wanted some time to relax. I was at a restaurant eating a burger on my own. I'm pretty sure I had my AirPods in, and the couple next to me, they were trying to decide what to eat. I had already had my food. They tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me." And as somebody that's been in Sweden for so long, it kind of struck me by surprise a little bit. And I said, "Oh, hey, what's up?" And they just wanted to know. They said, "Is the burger good?" And I was like, yeah, it's a good burger. That little interaction kind of struck me as, wow, okay. Because that doesn't happen as often in Sweden. You just quite often see a stranger come up to another stranger and strike a random conversation in Costco, or I thought of it when I was visiting my grandparents. They live on an island with 3,000 or 4,000 inhabitants, so you don't know everybody on the island, but they have this rule on the island that everybody waves to each other. So if there's 2 cars going by, you'll just give a 2-finger wave or whatever to the car coming to you, or I'd be going for morning runs and the drivers would be waving at me. And there's just this very openness that you don't always see in Sweden, especially where I live in the capital, Stockholm. People can be hustle bustle. Maybe people can be a little bit more open and friendly in the smaller towns. But I would say overall, it really did strike me how open and social Americans are. The second one, I don't know if this is just the Swedes that I've been spending time with, so you guys will have to make a comment down below. But I think that the Swedes that I've been around, they leave the lights on more often. In America, at least in my family, whenever we leave the house, we make sure every light in the entire house is turned off. And in Sweden, I'm not really sure, because I don't know why people do this, because in general, Swedes are so energy conscious and so conservative. So it seems strange that they would leave lights on when leaving the house. But leave a comment down below if you're Swedish. Do you do this? Is this just me? I'm curious to see your feedback, but I thought this was maybe an interesting one as well. Now, this third one I've also talked about in previous videos, but this trip has kind of put a new fresh perspective on it for me, and that is how nicely Swedes dress in general. And I want to get into maybe a little bit more reasons that I just thought of as to why this is. I was just thinking about it myself, and in Sweden, it's much more communal. Like, I take the public transportation much more, because in America, you can just drive everywhere. And when you're driving, you don't necessarily have that person-to-person contact as much. Whereas if you take the public transportation, you're going to be seeing lots of people. There's a much higher chance that you could see somebody that you know, whereas when you're driving in a car, you don't really know who's in the other cars. So this is just a complete theory, but I think maybe the fact that I take the public transportation more in Sweden, I'm more motivated to dress up and look nice when I leave the house. Whereas if I'm just running an errand in America, I'm just going to hop in my car, go to the post office and drive home. I don't really feel the need to put on nice clothes. I can go out in my sweatpants. But of course, there's a lot of people that drive in Sweden too, so I think this would maybe be a very, very small contributing factor to it, but I think it could play a little bit of a role because I've noticed it with my own mindset. And to this point about dressing nice, I've noticed that in America, I feel like I've seen a lot more Apple Watches in America than in Sweden. Whereas the people that I'm hanging with in Sweden, especially in the Stockholm area where people really like to dress up, they'll usually wear nicer watches because Apple Watches don't pair necessarily as well with more dressy clothes. Whereas in America, I've seen a ton more Apple Watches. I actually know people in Sweden that they like their nice watch, so they'll wear that on their left wrist, and then they also want to track their stats and their fitness and all those things, so they'll actually have the Apple Watch on the other wrist. So when my parents got me an Apple Watch for Christmas, I was like, all right, looks like I'm going to be double wristing now. This fourth thing I've noticed is that Americans seem to be a little bit more focused on security, and maybe they're a little bit more anxious and worried in general. And I noticed this in Sweden because I was completely surprised one time when we were on a train and people were working on their laptops or whatever, and one guy who was sitting there alone left his laptop just sitting on the train table and went up to go to the bathroom while his laptop was just left there unattended. I don't even think he logged out. That to me is a little bit crazy as an American, that somebody could just be so trusting. I think Americans are just a lot more worried about that kind of stuff. And I think one reason this could be is I've noticed watching news in Sweden and news in America, the news in Sweden doesn't really highlight the bad things very often. They're usually, I think watching the news in Sweden is generally a little bit more uplifting. And in America, they're always focusing on this school shooting happened, or this person got kidnapped, or this person died, or this took place. And all of these negative events, and people are constantly in this state of worry. And Sweden's a relatively safe country, but they also have things going on that are bad, just like in any place in the world. And I think the Americans maybe draw a little bit more attention to negative events. Not saying that it doesn't get news coverage at all in Sweden. Of course it does. But if you're comparing the two, I think that Americans might highlight that a little bit more, and people are just a little bit more worried about it. The fifth and final thing I want to talk about in this video is how sweet the food is. And this is something that I always heard from Europeans that would come and visit America. And I always maybe noticed it a little bit, but I noticed it even more on this trip. And I noticed it because I've become more accustomed to Swedish things like drinking coffee that is just completely black. I would have never done that in America. But now I've actually become quite fond of it and used to it. And coming back to America, when my parents would make me coffee, we have like the coffee creamers that you put in, and it tastes like so sweet and so sugary, almost too much. I remember when I lived here before, I absolutely loved this, and I still enjoy it. But because I've gotten so adjusted to the habits in Sweden, it stands out even more. And even some of my favorite recipes that I made in America before moving, I made them again on this trip. And I remember things being more sweet, even if it was something as simple as a tzatziki sauce that I was doing when I was marinating some lamb and having a Greek dinner. And the sauce just seemed so much more sweet to me this time. So those were the 5 things that stood out to me the most on this trip. I know it's similar to videos I've done in the past, so if this is the first time you've watched one of my videos, hit the subscribe button, because I've got a ton of different content about Sweden and American culture, because I think the differences are so fascinating. So be sure to check those out as well. Also, leave a comment down below. I'm always curious to see what you guys have to think, whether you're from Sweden, America, or someplace else. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.